Justin Hunt has tackled topics that few people want to think about, like meth addiction and absent fathers. But a friend's story about the dissolution of her marriage prompted him to examine the most difficult subject of his career, the growing phenomenon of pornography addiction. Check this out. 1 in 5 searches on mobile devices and 25% of all online searches are related to pornography. So what's the cost? About 56% of divorce cases involve one party having an obsessive interest in pornographic websites, and many addicts lose their spouses and even lose their jobs. Mr. Hunt, who worked as an anchor and reporter in New Mexico before becoming a filmmaker, sat down with producer Megan Kamerick to talk about why he is determined to finish this film, despite the numerous challenges it presents.
Justin Hunt, thanks for coming by to talk about your film on New Mexico in Focus. Now, you've made several documentary films, one about meth addiction, one about absent fathers. Why do something on pornography addiction? How did you get interested in those?
Well, I just like making feel-good movies. Films that cheer people up. They're just, they're topics that, you know, socially really need to be discussed, and nobody's discussing them as far as film is concerned. And I mean, not to the degree that I'm talking about them, or at least the angle that I'm talking about them from. And so, you know, I think that there's a need there, and I don't really consider myself a social activist. I'm a filmmaker that sees things that we need to talk about, that maybe people are afraid to approach or to really roll their sleeves up and get into. And so that's what I try to do. You know, this one was very interesting because I started thinking about this film about 4 or 5 years ago. I was having a discussion with a friend of mine from high school, and she had told me that she had gotten divorced, and when she explained to me why, and that her husband had had an addiction to pornography, I was blown away by that. And I think what really bothered me is that it bothered me so much. I didn't really think that that was a legitimate issue until she really started explaining to me the magnitude of it, and the lengths that he would go to act out and to hide things, and not only that, but the effect that it had on her as a person. And the thoughts that ran through her mind, and the disgust that she felt dealing with it. And so I was working on another project at the time, so I had to put it aside, and finally had the time to start working on it. And what an experience, and a learning experience it's been since I started.
So you're finding similar stories to hers as you started looking for people to talk to?
Oh goodness, yeah, like
just in the U.S., all over the world?
All over the world. Now, Betsy is her name. Betsy and her ex-husband Nate, ironically, are both in the film. He really wanted to be in the film as well once he heard about it. They're really the key principal story, that, you know, the common thread. They're our guide through this, as far as the personal, emotional side. The rest of it is corroborated with professionals and counselors and pastors and a few other individuals who have dealt with this kind of thing. But yeah, the people I have found have been extremely open and interested in talking about it, but it's not been easy to find those people and to find people to want to talk about it, whether we're talking about here in the U.S. or in any other country. And I think we've got interviews from 6 other countries, and it's a struggle in each one.
Now, as you know, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders is called the DSM, which is the Bible for anyone working in the mental health field, doesn't recognize this as an addiction. And there's a lot of debate among neuroscientists whether this is an addiction or a compulsion. Why are you convinced?
What makes this addiction unique is that a lot of it is subjective. There's not the hard data to prove that this cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. The spectrum can be different in different demographics and those kinds of things, so they can't really nail down that, you know, you can say if you drink alcohol it does this to your body, or if you do cocaine it does this to your body, but I don't think they've been able to nail down if you view this much pornography it does this to your body or to your brain. And I think that is probably the main reason that at this point it's not in there. I think, you know, technology is increasing so exponentially and so quick. We've just got thing after thing after thing that brings material to us mobily, that they're still kind of playing catch up on seeing, you know, what the effects of that are.
This is porn, you know, probably consenting adults doing what they want. Why is that harmful?
Well, you know, there's a couple of ways that it can be harmful, and again, the answer to that is subjective. You know, some people might think that, you know, just, I guess you would say vanilla heterosexual porn by two consenting adults being watched by two consenting adults is okay. But that's really up to those consenting adults.
But that's not what you're looking at in this film.
Well, I'm looking at just what watching it can do to the person and what kind of social effects it has. It can also become a problem when you think about somebody who, and I'm not going to say men versus women, because really we're at a point now where 1 in 3 addicts is a woman. So it's not really fair to generalize it as men. But let's take a man, for example, and I think it becomes a problem when he's choosing this synthetic relationship over the actual relationship, the tangible physical relationship with his wife. And, you know, if that's having an effect on her, an adverse effect on her, you know, but that's the thing, is there's so many interesting questions. If I'm looking, not I, but if a husband's looking at porn, is that cheating on his wife, or does that depend on what her perspective is of it? If, you know, if they decide to watch it together, is that, I mean, there's so many unique questions to it, and that's what we're trying to at least expose to people, not lead them one direction to right or wrong, but this is the new landscape. And then now you can go out and make some more educated decisions, or at least know more about the topic matter before you start making decisions and judgments and opinions.
So you've raised money for other documentaries. What has it been like trying to raise funds to get this one done?
Oh my goodness, this whole thing in general has been a bigger challenge than the other 3 films combined. I can say that on a physical level, on an emotional level, on a spiritual level. It's just been, there's such a darkness around this topic. And you know, for example, you know, I did the film Absent about the fatherhood issue, and I mean, people from all over the world, they just wanted to be a part of that conversation, and they wanted to talk about it, and they wanted to make comments on it, and they wanted to share it. And you know, I can't get any kind of response when I post something about this film. And then people will,
why do you think that's true?
I think, one, there's a great fear there. I think it's not because it's an irrelevant topic. I think it's because of its absolute relevance. And you know, just the vast number of people that have this in their life that are hiding it. Now, you know, you and I we can spot an alcoholic on the street or in a bar or somewhere. We can see when someone's potentially on drugs or something like that. But you can't see when someone's a porn addict, because it happens behind closed doors. It doesn't have an adverse physical effect. And so I think there's a shame that's associated with that. I think that there is, you know, potentially a stigma that, oh, if I get involved, I mean, I love the work that Justin's doing, but if I get involved, then are people going to think that I'm an addict, or that I'm a prude because I don't, you know, maybe that's part of it. I don't know, but I can tell you that it is universal. Australia, France, Germany, Scotland, Finland, these are places we've shot interviews, and it took 5 times longer than I thought it would to find people that would talk about it. And so it's not just here in the U.S., it's really kind of a universal issue, and it's not that it's you know, not part of their life. Like we were talking earlier, you know, we had a crowdfunding campaign. We raised 1.6% of the money that we need. But in the same amount of time, 50 days, there was just under 242 billion searches for porn in the U.S. alone.
So how do you propose finishing this film if you can't find more financial backing?
Well, prayer mostly. You know, I'm just, the film's going to get done one way or another. And so, you know, it's either going to be shots of talking heads, or it's going to be, and that's something that we haven't talked about yet, is that the film will be done without any provocative imagery, which I think is extremely important.
Why did you want to do it that way?
Well, because I think that it's counterproductive to do a film like this and then fill it full of triggers that are difficult for people that are dealing with it, or something that you can't show to kids, which is one of the demographics that we really need to try to inform and enlighten on this topic. And so when you're talking about doing a film about something like this without any provocative imagery, you've got to find creative ways to fill that visual void. And so we're talking about animation and visual effects and you know, photo manipulation and all kinds of different things that they all add up and they cost money. But the bottom line is, one way or another, it'll be done. but instead of, the difference will be someone on camera talking about how it affects the brain, or visual effects and animation showing how chemicals go through the brain and that's the only difference, and that's all dependent on the funding.
Well, Justin, thank you for coming and talking with us about this. And the film website is?
It's www. And then .xxxmovie.com. So it's .xxxmovie.com.
Okay. Well, thank you, Justin, for coming and talking.
Thank you. I appreciate it.